Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new, I'm glad that you stopped by. If you find you enjoy my channel, please consider subscribing, like and share my videos. Follow me on social media. I will leave all the links in the description box below. So today we are going to be making homemade apple cider. Now I have to give credit where credit is due. My sweet niece from Texas is coming next month to visit, and I told her to let me know of anything she would like to do together in the kitchen, if there's anything she'd like to learn, and asked her if maybe she'd be interested in doing a video with me. I don't know, we'll see. Maybe we can talk her into that. But anyway, she texted me the other day and said, I want to make homemade apple cider. I'm like, what? I'm thinking to myself, big apple press, pressing apples, all that. I'm thinking, I don't have the equipment to do that. But a quick Google and Pinterest search revealed that indeed you can make your own homemade apple cider in the comfort of your own kitchen. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And so I'm going to dedicate this video to Chloe, who gave me the idea to at least search for a way to do it. So that's what we're going to be doing. If you've been around my channel very much lately, you know we've been all abuzz about cider and how we can use it in apple recipes. In particular, we have made two different kinds of boiled cider, which we've been using to ramp up the apple flavor in the things that we're making. And I know you guys have been having a difficult time finding fresh pressed cider, which is what is recommended for making boiled cider. With that being said, we'll see if this will be a solution to your issue with finding it. This is not technically fresh pressed cider. We are going to press it through a sieve, but fresh pressed cider is typically not pasteurized. But this we're going to cook, so technically it is going to be pasteurized, but it won't have any preservatives or additives or anything like that in it, and I think it will work beautifully for making boiled cider. So we'll give it a try, but hopefully this will be an alternative to those of you who are having a difficult time finding fresh cider. Now you can this up if you are a canner. If you're not a canner, I encourage you to give it a try. But anyway, we can safely can this. The instructions for canning cider do say that it has to be pasteurized, so you have to bring it up to a temperature of between 160 to 185 degrees in order for that to happen. So we're going to cook our apples right around that temperature. So we're covered there, so we can this up if we so choose to do so. So that's something you might want to think about. And it just takes a few ingredients, and we're going to be cooking down our apples with some delicious ingredients, and it is simple to do. And then you can have your own cider to make boiled cider or to enjoy. It's great for parties, really delicious and fun to do. It'd be great to do with your kiddos this time of year. Fall is finally in the air. We have some cooler temperatures, and actually today is a very crisp, cool day here in central Ohio, and it's a lovely day for making cider. So let's get started. So like I said, we only need a few ingredients. We need apples, of course. I have quartered. I washed them really well in a sink full of cold water with some vinegar, white vinegar, to make sure that they're very nice and clean. We're not going to be peeling them. We are putting them, the whole shebang, in our pot. I have four different kinds of apples. I have Honeycrisp, Ginger Gold, Golden Delicious, and Fuji, but you can use any variety that you like. I highly recommend that you use several varieties. That helps to add a complex flavor to the cider. We are also going to be using an orange. Now with your orange, some recipes that I looked at, some of them use 2, some of them use 1. You use your own discretion. It's just supposed to be a little bit of a citrus flavor in the background. But for the orange, the yellow part, the white part of the orange can be bitter. So some people peel it, some people don't. My solution was to zest it, because there's a lot of flavor in the peeling, but we don't want the white part. So I just zested my orange, and I'm going to squeeze the juice into our cider. And then you need some delicious spices. I'm going to be using cinnamon sticks, whole cloves, and some allspice, but you can also use a piece of ginger. You can use some whole nutmeg. some cardamom if you wanted to. So it's all up to you how much. Do you just want to use those really nice warm spices, but you pick and choose what you want to use and how much you want to use, and then we're going to use some water for cooking down our apples. So it's really simple. You can do this in the crock pot, you can do it on the stove, or you can also do it in an Instant Pot. I'm going to be doing it on the stove. That's my preferred way. The other reason that I've chosen to do it on the stove is because I can better control the temperature. One of the things I read about making it, or making any juice really, you don't want to overcook it because then it can have a cooked flavor instead of having a fresh flavor, and we don't want that. So we're just going to bring it up just to the point that it just starts to boil, and then we are going to lower the temperature so that it's just at a nice gentle simmer, so we retain that nice fresh flavor from our apples. So like I said, easy peasy stuff here. We're going to be adding our apples to a nice big pot. I have 12 apples, but you can use, some recipes called for 10. It just depends on how big your apples are, I guess, and how much apple flavor you want. I thought a dozen was nice. My Honey Crisp were pretty nice size, and so were my Fuji's. They were more of a large apple, I would say, but all I did was just quarter them. I washed them real well and quartered them. You're going to need a nice big pot for this. This is an 8-quart stock pot, just for reference. And then I'm going to squeeze the juice out of my orange. Then I'm going to add the zest of my orange. And then we're going to add our delicious spices. So I'm going to use 3 cinnamon sticks. I don't want my spices to be overpowering. Some people used 4. I'm just going to use 3 because I really want to enjoy the flavor of the apples. I don't want it to be overpowered by spices, but you use your own discretion on that. I'm going to use about 10 allspice berries, just whole allspice. It's easy to find. Great with apples. And then we're going to use about 2 teaspoons of whole cloves. Cloves can be very strong, so I recommend using those sparingly. And then last but not least, we need about 16 cups of water, give or take. That's 4 quarts. And your apples will float. Some of the instructions, some of the recipes I read, they say to cover. Well, your apples are going to float, so it's almost impossible to cover your apples with water. So you're going to need about 16 cups or so. All right, so once you get your water in there, just go ahead, and you want your heat to start off on high. Like I said, we want to bring it up to a boil, just to a boil, so you want to keep an eye on it. We don't want to give that overcooked flavor. So just up to a boil. Once you get to a boil, we're going to quickly reduce the heat just to maintain a really nice gentle simmer. Okay guys, you can see I have some bubbling going on. We are just coming up to a boil, but I don't want it to get to a full boil, so I'm going to go ahead and just start decreasing my heat. We just want to maintain just a really gentle simmer, so you're just going to have to keep an eye on it. I also I wanted to get my spices down under the water, so I just used a spoon to kind of get things submerged. So I'm going to go ahead and you can see we've got more bubbles now. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put my lid on. I'm going to decrease the heat just to maintain a really nice simmer, and we're going to simmer it for 2 hours. Okay guys, I just wanted to bring you in real close. It's been almost an hour that I've been cooking my cider, and in the instructions from one of the sites that I read said to make sure you leave a 2-inch space at the top of your pot, and I'm finding out why. Your apples start to absorb some of the liquid as they're cooking down, and they start to rise to the top and expand. So make sure you do leave 2 inches at the top of your pot. Don't fill your pot all the way with apples and water, or you will have them coming out of your pot as they cook. So make sure you leave a headspace of about 2 inches or so. in your pot when you're filling it. And you can also see here, I think it's just barely simmering here, and that's really what we want. And my house smells so amazing, you guys. This is great to do on a fall day. Guys, it's been about 2 hours. You can see we have our nice simmer going on here, and our apples are starting to break down. So what we're gonna do at this point is I'm gonna use a potato masher. You can use a potato masher, or you can just use the back of a wooden spoon. And we're just gonna go in and make sure to give everything a nice mash. Be careful when you do this. You don't wanna get burned. Okay, I got everything mashed up. Like I said, you're gonna wanna be careful if you're using a potato masher, because it's, at least with the pot I have, it's pretty deep, and I had a hard time getting to the bottom without my hand touching the liquid. So make sure you're careful. The back of a wooden spoon works well too. I just kind of mashed things I couldn't get in the bottom up against the side, and then just give it a really good stir. And now what we're gonna do is I'm gonna add a 1/2 cup of packed brown sugar. You can use whatever sweetener you like. And it's hard to say just how much. Most of the recipes I read liked the 1/2 cup. Some people use regular sugar, some people use honey. So use whatever sweetener appeals to you. Brown sugar seemed to be a favorite among people who do this regularly. So I'm gonna go with brown sugar. I like the idea of that molasses flavor with the cider. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna go ahead and continue to cook it. The instructions at this point are to cook with the lid on. I think I'm going to leave my lid off for just a little bit. I want some concentration to happen. I want some of my liquid to evaporate, and I want that flavor to concentrate. So I'm going to let mine cook with the lid off for a 1/2 hour, and then maybe put the lid on and cook for the other 1/2 hour. But we need to, either way you choose to do it, we need to cook for another hour, and then I will bring you back. Okay guys, my cider has been boiling for 3 hours now. After we mashed everything and put the brown sugar in it, I did take the lid off for about a 1/2 hour to get a little bit of evaporation and concentration to happen. And then I put the lid back on it, and it's been simmering ever since. I'm gonna let it simmer for about 4 hours, I think. All the recipes I consulted said 3. I feel like I need a little more depth of flavor. So I'm gonna let it simmer a bit longer, but while we're doing that, we can go ahead and sterilize our jars for canning. If you're canning this up, you are going, our processing time for quart jars or pint jars is only 5 minutes. So we have to sterilize our jars this time. I know we don't do that for very many recipes, but in this case, we do need to. You can also can this in the 1/2 gallon jars if you have them. In that case, you process those for 10 minutes in a boiling water bath or steam canner. And in that case, you wouldn't have to pre-sterilize your jars, but quarts and pints, I'm gonna be using quarts, so I have to sterilize my jars. So this will be a good learning experience. Something that I don't have on my channel is showing you guys how to sterilize your jars. So I'm just using my good old Victoria. This is a water bath canner and a steam canner, but I have the rack inside of it. And I'm only gonna get about 3 quarts, I think, of my cider. So we'll put 3 quart jars in there. And then you're gonna fill your canner and your jars, start with filling your jars first with hot water. And then you're going to put enough hot water in here to cover your jars by 1 inch. We're gonna put on the lid, bring it up to a boil, and we're gonna boil our jars for 10 minutes to sterilize them. Okay guys, I filled my canner with hot water. It's covering my jars by 1 inch. So I went ahead and put the lid on. I have my heat on high, and we're going to bring it up to a full boil, and we're going to boil our jars for 10 minutes. Then they will be ready for processing. While that's happening, we're going to strain off our cider and get it ready for canning. Okay guys, so while we are sterilizing our jars, we're going to go ahead and strain off our cider. As you can see, I do have some evaporation. I told you about that. I wanted a richer flavor. So we're going to go ahead, and I think we're just going to start by ladling it in. I've got a fine mesh strainer with some cheesecloth on top. So we'll just go ahead and start filling our strainer. I did a tip from one of my sweet viewers. She said that she used her immersion blender to blend down some of her solids, so I did that as well. It didn't start out that way, obviously. I just smashed it with the potato masher like I showed you. But then I was chatting with her as I was making this, and she said she used her immersion blender. That's why mine's not real chunky. Mine looks more like applesauce instead. So I did use an immersion blender, and I think that's a great trick. Thank you, Story, for giving us that little tip. So what you want to do now is you want, as you strain it, you want to push it through the strainer to get as much flavor in there as possible. Okay guys, I found this process worked a little bit better without the cheesecloth. So I got rid of my cheesecloth. I don't think you're needed if you have a strainer that's fairly fine. Then I just started pouring it in. And then just take your spoon and work it around and see it's straining just fine without the cheesecloth. So skip the cheesecloth part. I think that that's overkill. I don't think that you need it. Okay guys, I've strained my cider and my jars are done sterilizing, and since we had to get the water bath canner going for sterilizing the jars, I'm just going to water bath this time, but you can steam can this. It's just more convenient since you have to sterilize your jars to just use that water and go ahead and water bath can them. So I think what I'm going to do, empty one of these jars. I'm not going to can all of it. I know I sterilized 3-quart jars. 1 quart I'm going to save, and I'm going to boil that down. And we're going to do a comparison of the boiled cider and see how close it is to using fresh pressed cider. So you need your hot jars. We talked about sterilizing your lids. If you're using the ball lids, you don't need to sterilize them, and I highly recommend you do not, because if you boil them or simmer them, your seals will not work. They are intended to just be washed and set aside, which is what I did. So don't worry about those if you're using the ball lids. We need 1/4 inch headspace in our jars, and we don't need to debubble. It's liquid. There's going to be nothing to trap air, so all we need to do is just funnel it in. So just going to go ahead and take our cider, pour it into our jars to 1/4 inch headspace. And then I'm going to take a paper towel dipped in white vinegar like I always do, clean the rims of my jars. We're going to center our lid and apply the band to fingertip tight. I think I failed to mention this, but you need to make sure that your apple cider is at a simmering temperature. You don't want to let it cool and then can this. I started this as soon as I strained my cider. We're canning it up, so I don't need to reheat mine, but if you've let yours cool, you need to reheat it. So now we're just going to go ahead and pop our jars back into our canner, and mine is still being covered by 1 inch, so we're going to go ahead and turn our heat on. I am going to, here's another trick that I use. We do this in pressure canning. Since I don't do much water bath canning, you guys haven't seen me do this, but to keep your jars nice and clean during the canning process, I use a couple of tablespoons of white vinegar in my water, and it keeps the minerals in your water from collecting on your jars, keeps them nice and clean. So we're going to go ahead and put our lid on, crank the heat up to high, bring it back up to a full boil, and then we are going to process for 5 minutes. Okay, so for those of you who are not canning, I thought I would go ahead while my canner is coming up to temperature here, just talk a little bit about the differences, show you the difference between, this is fresh pressed cider that I had in my refrigerator, and this is what we just made. So there is a difference in color, but the flavor, you guys, is very similar. The flavor is similar. What we cooked is not quite as strong, but it is still delicious and absolutely worth your effort. Now the true test is going to be what happens when I try to boil this down into boiled cider. I'm hoping it will work because many of you are struggling with getting a hold of the fresh pressed cider. So I will boil it down for you. I will give you my thoughts on that. But this was fun to do. A couple of thoughts that I had as I was going through the process. All of the recipes I consulted said to cook this simmer it for 3 hours. I don't think that that's long enough, and when I consulted my friend Story, she said she cooked hers longer as well. So I think it benefits from a longer cooking time as long as you're keeping it on a nice low simmer. You're not going to have a cooked apple taste. I don't feel. It still tastes very fresh. Has great flavor to it. So, but I think it would benefit from cooking longer. I could probably even have gone another hour or two, maybe even to the 6-hour mark. It's just kind of up to you, but I would make sure you keep it on a nice low, slow temperature. You don't want to boil it hard at all. You just want a nice gentle simmer here to infuse all of those flavors. And another thought that I had, several of the recipes I consulted did not give you instructions for how much water to use. One of the recipes I found said to use the 16 cups. I couldn't fit a full 16 cups in the stock pot that I had. Their solution to that was to divide it up. So I just went with what I could fit in there, and that was about 13 cups. So I think, my opinion after doing this is my ratio would be a cup of water for each apple. I used a dozen apples and used approximately 13 cups of water. I think you could do a little less than that. So if you want a decent ratio to go by, I think for a medium to large size apple, I would use about a cup, 3/4 to a cup of water for every apple that you're using. I think that that will give you great flavor. I think the 16 cups of water to the number of apples I had, even though all the reviews were very good for the recipe that I consulted, they were all fantastic. But it didn't have as much flavor as, I think you can get better flavor by using less water. That's just my opinion, although it tastes fantastic. So that's my take on it. Use 3/4 of a cup to a cup of water for every apple you're using. Adjust your spices accordingly. Simmer it low and slow. And I think the 3 hours is short on the time. I think it benefits from cooking longer. I went 4 hours. I think I could have even gone a little bit more. So that's my take on it. Okay guys, if you have this canner like I do, the gauge on top is not just for steam canning, it's also for water bath canning. So once you are in your green zone, you should be at a full rolling boil. Once you get there, you want to reduce your heat slowly so that you're just maintaining being just inside of your green zone or maintaining a full boil throughout your process. So make sure you reduce your heat just to maintain 5 minutes, and then I'll bring you back. Okay, once your time is up, you can go ahead and turn off your burner, and we are going to gently, carefully remove our lid. Make sure you tilt it away from you so that you don't get burned. We're gonna remove the lid, we're gonna let our jars sit for 5 minutes, and then we can take them out of our canner. Hey, I guess I'm getting out of my groove. I forgot to mention, if you did want to steam can this, it's totally fine to do so. If you use a canner like I have, it has the dial gauge on top. You wanna make sure you have a steady stream of steam coming out, and if you have the gauge, then you're gonna be in your green zone, just like for water bath canning. 5 minutes, same deal, turn off the heat. It's very similar to water bath canning, so I did forget to mention that. So just make sure you have a steady stream of steam, you're in your green zone, and then you can start your timing. And then when you're done, turn off your heat, remove the lid, and like I said before, my recommendation now is we're gonna leave our jars in even when we steam can for at least 5 minutes. So we are just about ready to take our jars out now. They've been sitting for 5 minutes. So we are ready to remove them from the canner. So carefully remove them. You have a tendency to want to tilt your jars to get rid of the water on top. Try to avoid doing that if you can, because you can get burned and we don't want that. So let your jar sit undisturbed 12 to 24 hours. Then you can remove your bands, check your seals, wash your jars, and then label them and store them in a cool, dark, dry place. So, like I said, I am boiling down my last quart of cider for you to see how that works for boiled cider. Thanks so much for joining me today, guys. I appreciate you coming along with me. I hope you will give your own homemade cider a try. It really was fun to do, and I hope you will try it as well. Have a great day, and I will see you next time.